I had been living in a loft apartment that was the third floor of a house. Two other couples lived in the apartments below me. I lived just off of campus in what's called a cusp neighborhood, which is basically a safer, just more family-orientated area, which was a mix of some college students as well as old people and families. Since my apartment was on the third floor, the door I used was around back with 2 flights of stairs going up to my apartment door. Also, my bedroom was at the front of the house, with 2 big windows that faced the street. One night, I was coming back from working on my thesis with a classmate at her apartment. It was late, around midnight, and I drove down my street to find parking. I lived at a cul-de-sac with a dead end, so I turned around when I didn't see parking and decided to park on the main street that ran perpendicular to mine. I had done this many times before and walked to my apartment late at night on multiple occasions and always felt safe. After I got out of the car and pulled my 2 heavy bags out, I noticed a man standing in the street where mine began. He was about 40 feet away and his face was sort of covered by shadow, but he was facing me and I could tell he was staring at me. He seemed to be in his 30s, was wearing regular looking clothing, and had a dog that looked to be a kind of beagle next to him. Normally, I would just shrug it off as some guy out walking his dog, no biggie. But I still had one of those really bad gut feelings like something was up with this guy, and here's why. First of all, he pretty much seemed to appear out of nowhere. I had been driving down my street and I didn't see anyone, nor did I see anyone up or down the street I parked on. And I was actively looking around to find a parking space, so I would have seen if someone was walking down the street. Secondly, he was just standing there, facing me. If he were walking his dog, shouldn't he be doing the obvious, like walking? And the last thing that to me was the creepiest was that he was standing in the middle of the street, not by one of the sidewalks on either side, but smack in the middle, like he was trying to block the street or something. I fumbled for my keys to lock my door and noticed him still standing there, just staring. I knew I had to walk by him to get to my apartment, so I was starting to get pretty creeped out at this point. Not to mention that his dog was just as frozen as he was, not moving and also staring at me. So I sort of half smiled in his direction and said, "Hello," pretty loudly, trying to show confidence in that I wasn't scared of him. I started walking as far to the left of my street as I could, the side that my house was on, making sure my house key was ready to go to unlock my door quickly. My house was 4 houses down from the top of the street, and there's a small street lamp right in front of my neighbor's house that kept it from being totally dark. The man hadn't said anything in return, and I was avoiding eye contact, trying to look straight ahead. Something possessed me to glance at him, and I wish I hadn't. When I looked to my right, he was grinning at me. This really sinister looking grin. The only thing moving was his head as he followed me. I snapped my head back and increased my speed, trying to mentally locate where my phone was in my bag if I had to call 911. When I got to my house, I turned left to take the little path leading to where my door was and quickly glanced back to see if he was following me. He was directly under my neighbor's street lamp, like a spotlight, about 15 feet from me, just standing there with his frozen dog still staring and still smiling. At this point, I just bolted to my door. It was not well lit by any means, and I couldn't see whether or not he was going to follow me to the door. I unlocked the door as fast as I could, slammed it behind me and deadbolted it shut. I turned off the stair light because I didn't want him to see me through the window at the second floor landing and know which floor I lived on. I fumbled up the stairs to my apartment door, unlocked that and turned off all the lights to my apartment. I crept into my bedroom. Thank God that I had drawn the blinds before I left, and made a little hole in them with my fingers to look outside. Much to my horror, he was standing in the middle of the street again, directly in front of my house, looking up at my window, still smiling, and this time, waving. I freaked out and grabbed my phone from my bag and called my dad. I probably should have called the police in hindsight. I was in hysterics, telling him what was happening. He told me to calm down, make sure all my doors and windows were locked, and call campus PD. I called the campus police, and this time, much more calmly explained my ordeal. By this time, I felt safe enough to look out the window again, and I didn't see him. They eventually came about half an hour later, took my statement, and searched for the guy who, of course, was never found. They did say, however, that there were boot prints in the dirt by my back door, as well as the same prints in the side garden my neighbours who lived in the first floor kept. The garden was on the other side of my house, right under one of their windows. Needless to say, I made sure both of my first and second floor neighbours were warned about this creep. I think the thing that creeps me out the most is that I never saw him actually walk anywhere. It seemed like he just appeared. I never heard footsteps or any indication he had moved closer to me. Every time I saw him, he was just standing there, with his dog who wasn't moving either. Not a sound from either of them. That smile still gives me the shivers. Number 4. So, I'm a fairly new police officer, out of the military recently. Just finished up my probationary field training period with my department a few months ago. This all happened a couple of months ago, shortly after my training period finished up, and I got on patrol and work shifts by myself. It was a very small department, only 4 full-timers, including me, 8 part-timers, and 8-ish reserve officers. So I live in a rural New England town, very large land-wise, very old but very small population-wise. I'm dispatched to a wicked strange situation. I'm being informed that a woman is saying that there's someone in her upstairs in a home. So I arrive on scene. I'm greeted by a young woman about my age with 3 kids, aged 2-ish and 8-ish, in her arms. She is incredibly distraught. The kids are crying. We'll call the woman V. V explains that she is the babysitter for these kids. Her parents are out of town. She was playing with the kids downstairs when they heard a tremendous bang from upstairs, then another. Then it was like someone was jumping up and down. Then footsteps, heavy footsteps. Then the footsteps are running. Now, this house is at least 200 to 250 years old, and it's more of a mansion to be honest. The current owners are extremely wealthy. B tells me that the owners had done some extensive renovations, and following this, she had begun to hear noises. Small things though, nothing like this. Well, my first thoughts weren't anything necessarily paranormal. I'm pretty much a skeptic when it comes to all that, even though I've had 1 or 2 more strange experiences beside this one. My first thought is that someone is actually in the house, realized V and the kids were home, and begun rushing around upstairs to locate an exit. I wasn't jumping to fucking ghost man just yet. So having had plenty of CQB experience while in Afghanistan, I was not about to clear such a huge house on my own, blind spots galore. I secure the family in my cruiser and go to the side of the house, where, luckily, I'm able to cover both the front and rear of the house, and one side of it, so 3/4 of the exit are covered. I'm the only officer on shift at the time, so dispatch has to request an officer from a town we have a mutual aid policy with. He's on a back road that connects directly to the town I'm in, so he gets there in 5 minutes. He arrives with his field training officer, FTO. He was still new enough to be riding with him. Luckily, I know this guy. He was a newbie cop, like me, but also a veteran with combat experience. So I know his clearing skills are on point, and I feel better. The FTO says he'll take charge of the family, where to clear the home, so off we go. He enters from the rear of the house, I go in from the front and meet in the middle. Clear the first floor, then the basement, then up to the second floor, then the attic. Now, we both got a wicked creepy vibe up there. I mean, as soon as we got up there, he goes, "Fuck man, you feeling that shit?" I acknowledge him and we continue on. As we get deeper into the attic, we get this horrible chill. There's nothing up there. But shit, if something had been knocked over or a mouse had run by, yeah, I think I would have opened up on it. So we rechecked the house one more time. It was late fall, so all the windows were closed. We checked every single one. Locked from the inside, obviously. Front and back doors were unlocked, but V had both doors in her side. Besides, for someone to come in the house, then get upstairs, they would have to walk past V and the kids. So, we go to talk to the FTO. He had been talking with V and the kids. His opinion? She seems like a nice, honest girl, and the kids seem well behaved and honest as well. They were all genuinely scared, in his opinion. None of them were making this up. Now, we're all cop chatting, the three of us standing together, all of us at least semi-facing the house, when our FTO goes, "Holy fucking shit, that attic curtain just fucking pulled back." My buddy and I look up. Sure enough, the curtain in the attic that had been covering the only window, one we didn't even bother to touch, was fucking pulled back like someone was watching us. From our angle, we couldn't really see in that well, so it wasn't obvious if someone was actually standing in the window. The FTO draws his weapon, points it up there, starts yelling for us to go cover. We know the drill, we were way ahead of him, and he tells us to get inside and get that asshole. So, as we both sprint into the house again, we're quickly talking. Why would someone pull the curtain, then remain standing there, curtain open, when they saw all of us standing there? We get up there and nothing. Yep, nothing. Oh, and the attic was still closed when we got to it for the second time. We got outside. The FTO says that the curtain fell closed about 10 seconds after we entered the home. By then, another officer had arrived. We do a perimeter check. We check the house again, top to bottom, with a fresh pair of eyes. Nothing. Well, we're sufficiently freaked the fuck out. There was not much else we could do though. They had been on the phone with the owners and the FTO had talked to them. They got V and the kids a hotel room for the rest of the time that they were gone. We stayed while they packed and that was that. So fast forward a couple of weeks, I ended up bumping into V again and we became friends. So first time she comes over to my place, obviously, we discussed what happened. She says, since then, the kids say that there is an old lady that appears to them and is really nice. But the dark man is really mean. Fuck that. So, as far as she knows, they are actually planning on moving out of there, if for no other reason than their children's mental health. Number 3. This particular event happened almost a year ago, sometime in mid-October. A couple of friends and I drove out to visit an old friend of ours from high school, George, who now lived about an hour out of the city. We spent the whole day with him and it was really late when we finally decided to start the drive back home. My friend Lisa was passed out in the passenger seat. She had had a few drinks and decided to spend the ride home asleep. My other friend Sam was sitting in the back seat behind Lisa and was playing a game on her smartphone. I, of course, was driving. I was following the GPS's instructions back to the freeway. At that moment, we were driving down a dark street with thick trees bordering both sides. Everything was pretty peaceful, the only sounds I could hear being that of the car moving along the road and the radio on low volume. Suddenly, my car let out a loud jolt and it felt as if I hit something. Sam let out a shocked scream while Lisa remained dead asleep. I slammed on the brakes and the car came to a halt. I was breathing heavily when I asked what the hell had just happened. Sam peered through the back window and gasped. She turned to me with an angry look on her face and shouted that I had just hit a dog. I looked through the back window and sure enough, a dog was lying on the road a few yards behind the car. Sam is a pretty big animal lover, so I wasn't surprised to see her get pissed at me. She was about to open her door and rush to the animal's aid when I stopped her. Once I had gotten over the shock of running over a dog, I got a feeling in my gut that told me that something was off. I'm no braggart, but I considered myself to be a very attentive and safe driver. My eyes were on the road at all times, and I distinctly remember not seeing any dog in the road prior to the car jolting. Yeah, it was dark, but I was sure that I would have at least seen the dog in the headlights before hitting it. I looked through the back window and took a closer look at the dog, or at least as much as I could make out in the reddish light coming from my taillights. It was a fairly big dog, at least a golden retriever or something like that. One particular detail caught my attention. I could see the dog's tail wagging. Now, I'm no expert on the mannerisms of animals, but I was sure the last thing a dog would do after being hit by a car would be to wag its tail. After a moment of thought, I pressed my foot down on the accelerator and sped off. Sam snapped at me and ordered me to go back, but I told her that something was wrong with the whole situation. She continued to argue, but she fell silent as she turned back towards the back window. She asked, "What the heck?" with a shaken voice. I looked in the rearview mirror. Though it was dark, I was able to make out the silhouettes of three large figures emerging from the trees on the side of the road. The dog was now up on its feet and jumping around joyfully. The three figures looked in our direction as I pressed my foot on the gas harder and sped off. Sam and I remained silent for the rest of the ride home. It wasn't until a few days later that we told Lisa about it. We've been back to visit George a few times since then, but we always make sure to leave before sunset. Still, I dread to think about what would have happened if we had gotten out of the car. Number 2. A little bit of a description and backstory to help paint the picture. At the time of this, I was roughly 26 years old. I'm 30 now. My husband and I at the time lived in a military city. He was enlisted, and this particular city was popular, not just for the base it housed, but by its incredible crime rate. Honestly, if people had warned us ahead of time, we would have happily moved out of the city and dealt with the long drive. At the time, we lived in a duplex in a really bad neighborhood. The way the unit was set up was if you stood in the street of our parking lot style driveway and looked at the house, our unit was to the left, our neighbors to the right, and exposed to the street since our building was on the corner. The entire property was surrounded by a chain link fence, save a 6-foot privacy fence that ran along the back of the property to block our view of the parking lot that led to the apartments behind us. I promise this will be relevant. As I said, we lived in a horrible neighborhood where crackheads and hookers ran free, but I didn't ever feel overly unsafe. At the time, I had a 200-pound English Mastiff, a sweetheart but intimidating from a distance, and my size always gave me a hint of security. We also had a few sweet neighbors which helped buffer the horrible. One such neighbor was a man that walked the neighborhood regularly. He walked everywhere, and our house was about the center in his path to the store and the like, so we'd see him at least once a day or so. Dwayne was a nice enough man, my height, roughly my build, and always smiling, but not that creeper kind of smile, a normal, jovial smile. He never set off alarm bells, which makes this more disturbing. We'd been living in our house for about a year or so, and all the while gotten to know some of our neighbours better. Up until this point, Dwayne would always wave hello and offer some small talk. He'd speak to my husband more than myself because I just don't do well in southern heat and he tended to be long-winded. So I'd wave, say hello, and then go inside after a few short minutes. Everything was fine until my husband was deployed. We'd been married at this point for 6 years, and this was the 5th deployment during that time, so I was used to being left alone. It didn't bother me in the least, especially since it would be a 9-week deployment, and I'd already learned the layout of the new city fairly well. One day, I was coming home from the grocery store about 2 weeks after my husband had left. I'm a firm believer in a one trip with the bags, so I loaded up my arms completely and headed for the house. As I said before, our yard was completely encased in a fence, so just after I managed to shut the gate, I hear someone calling up at me. Turning, I saw Dwayne bearing his normal, happy wide smile and heading for me. I shift the bags and give him my attention. I was raised to be polite to people, and since I knew him vaguely, I had no problem saying hello. Besides, seeing my arms full of groceries, some of which was milk, eggs, and other cold things, he surely wouldn't keep me too long. I was wrong. He starts droning on about nothing in particular, during which I could only smile and nod. I waited patiently for a break in the conversation so I could head inside, but he barely took a second to breathe, let alone let me speak. For a little while, the conversation had been pretty mundane, until he started talking about his lady friend. Without warning, he started to tell me explicit details about his relationship with whoever this woman was. He went on to tell me how much she likes what he can do to her, his techniques, and, to my horror, how good he is at going down on her. I knew I must have looked as horrified as I felt because he just started chuckling and went on as though nothing was wrong. He even went as far as to ask if my husband was as good. At this point, not only were the grocery bags digging into my hands and arms, but I was thoroughly creeped the fuck out. I told him I had to go and put my groceries away and let out the dogs. I thought that was the end of the conversation, but evidently not, nor was it any less unsettling. "Oh yeah, your man's gone now, huh?" It took my brain a second to realize what he'd said. I never told him my husband was gone. I didn't tell anyone who wasn't a close friend, so naturally, my guard rose. "Yeah," he went on, "you need someone here to take care of you." "I'm fine," was all I could really think to say. For some reason, I didn't even bother saying he was wrong. I guess on some level, I thought my husband must have told him. "Well, how about I come by later and make you dinner tonight? I'm a hell of a cook." I knew my brows came together and my eyes were wide because I could feel it. "How about 6? I can come back around 6, make you some dinner, and then we can watch some TV. You shouldn't be alone." He just kept persisting, which made every hair on my body stand on end. I told him no thanks and turned around. Without bothering to look back, I went inside, locked my doors, and waited until I was sure that he was gone before I let my dogs out. By the time 6 came, I didn't even want to be in the house in case he did stop by. After making sure everything was locked up tight, I left and drove around for an hour or so before coming home. I didn't even bother turning on more than the TV when I got back, just in case he came by again. I didn't see him for a couple of days, maybe a week and a half. I was a smoker back then and hated smoking in the house, so I let the dogs out, smoke a cigarette, and bring them back inside. After Dwayne's disturbing confrontation, I took to smoking in the backyard on my back steps. From where I sat, I could only see a few feet of the main street. Being as our unit was away from the street, beside neighbours who had trees and bushes, and the privacy fence between us and the apartments, I felt relatively shielded. I knew that if I saw Dwayne, I'd be more than capable of ducking around the corner of the house and hiding. Like I said, it was a small strip of road that left me exposed. It was really easy to stay hidden, or so I thought. One day, I'm standing outside in the front yard, talking to the sweet little old lady that lived across the street. We were just having a nice little talk until Dwayne suddenly came walking up. I, of course, felt uneasy, but a little safer with my neighbour there since I didn't think he'd be as gross as he was before. He wasn't, but he was no less creepy. My neighbour had asked me if I had quit smoking because she didn't see me out the front anymore. I didn't immediately answer because Dwayne was there, but it didn't matter. He spoke up first and told my neighbour, "Nah, she smokes in the backyard now." My blood ran cold. Not once, not one single fucking time had I seen him walk by while I was back there. I never saw him walk by while I was back there, nor did I catch a glimpse of him when I stepped out of my front door and walked around back. Never. I politely excused myself and went inside, creeped out as hell. The only way I could think that he might have known I was in the back was if he somehow had been watching me through the bushes and trees, in my neighbour's yard to the other side, or through the privacy fence that led to the apartments. Each thought was as disturbing as the last. I couldn't stand the thought of him peering at me from the shadows. That was the last time I smoked outside. I didn't go outside unless I had errands to run until my husband came home a few weeks later. I told him everything and he admitted that it was creepy as hell and just told me to keep our mastiff close, who was very protective of me. And I did. The last time I saw Dwayne was just a glimpse. I had let my dogs outside and a few minutes after sitting back on the couch, I heard my mastiff losing his mind. Anyone who owns dogs knows the difference between a normal bark and an angry, "I'm gonna rip your leg off" bark. This was the latter, and it terrified me. Until this point, he'd only ever growled protectively twice and never barked. Freaked out, I opened up the front door and saw Dwayne standing halfway up my driveway. It looked like he'd been walking up my fence, probably to say hi when my dog caught sight of him. The bark was so ferocious that it had him and me completely still. My dog continued to bark and even charged the fence, which he easily could have taken down if he chose. Every hair on the back of his neck and down his spine was standing on end, and it was pretty obvious that he wanted a piece of Dwayne. Dwayne glanced at me, forced a smile and a wave, and backed away slowly out of the driveway. My dog didn't calm down until he was out of sight, at which time I was able to get him in the house. I was so grateful that I gave him half a package of sliced turkey lunch meat. I don't know what or if Dwayne had anything planned, but my dog, who never had a problem with him up until that point, definitely knew something wasn't right. Like I said, we'd been in that house for just over a year, and many times Dwayne had stopped at the fence to talk, and our dog never reacted like that. It still freaks me out to think about why my dog suddenly changed his mind, and I haven't seen Dwayne since. Number 1. A little background story about me. I'm a female, Colombian, 29 years old, athletic and adventurous. I enjoy traveling, walking, hiking, and camping. This happened about 6 years ago. In one of those trips, I was with my ex-boyfriend and our 2 dogs. He had a crossbreed brown lab-looking dog, and mine is a golden retriever. Not scary dogs at all, but certainly big and powerful barks. We always went walking with them on trails and exploring around the city limits, but this time he had heard about this river in the middle of the mountains with a huge cascade that seemed to be out of this world. The place was described by him to his college mates and it sounded beautiful, so we assumed it would be a fun way to spend our Sunday morning and early afternoon. We packed simple bags with sandwiches, snacks, water, and beer, and off we went. Once we made it to the beginning of the trail, the dogs seemed impatient. They were very active when they were together, so we assumed that they just wanted to run and we let them loose. The mountain started out in a very steep way. We pretty much had to climb along sharp rocks for about 15 minutes before we could reach the actual trail. Keep in mind that Colombia is nothing like the United States. Our wild areas are actually wild. No trails designated, no forest rangers, no watchtowers, none of that sort. Once you're out of the city limits, you're pretty much on your own, and there certainly is no cops or anything around these areas. They are highly underpopulated and overall deserted. Once we reached the trail, we noticed that it was hardly visible to see it. Trails are usually patches of the forest that aren't so prominent, so you can see somewhat of a trail left, but it was made by people or animals walking around, so it gets very faint sometimes, and many times you don't see it or have no idea where to go. This trail was like that, which we actually liked, because that meant that there would be no people around bothering us and we could smoke and enjoy the river on our own. We got excited and kept walking through the almost invisible trail. A little ways down, we started hearing branches break, voices and a little bit of laughter. We looked at each other with disappointment because we wanted to be alone, and these sounds clearly indicated that we were not. We kept walking and then saw some colors and shapes through the bushes. They stopped as well and saw us. The elderly man waved and he was getting closer. His wife walked behind but holding him from his elbow. They walked slowly and we exchanged pleasantries about the day and what a nice day to hike sort of thing. When they reached us, he looked up at us as he was petting the dogs. "You guys heading back?" "No, actually, we just got started. We wanted to reach the waterfall in the mountain over there." He looked at where I was pointing and frowned. I found it odd, and then he replied, "You guys should be careful. I hear a lot of stories about people getting lost in these parts, or even worse. You're better off heading back with us." We both thought that the old man was just being a wet blanket, and we were somewhat experts in trails, hiking, camping, and living on the edge. So my ex said, "Nah, we'll be fine. We have these two beasts to protect us." To which we all kind of chuckled. He then said, "Well, anyway, be very careful. And you, sweetheart, you should tuck that little gold chain inside your shirt. You never know who is looking for that stuff to yank it off." I had yet to think about that. I was wearing a little golden chain on my neck, except it wasn't golden. It was a 24-karat gold chain that was given to me by my godfathers when I was born. It was a tradition in my family that every time a baby was born, all the uncles, aunts, friends, and close family members gave us gold accents with different shapes and forms as well as a chain to hang them all from. This is a Colombian thing, and it mostly ensures good luck for the new baby by presenting gold gifts as the three wise men did to Jesus. I had found the chain on my mum's safe during my last visit to her house and was wearing it ever since. No accents though, just the chain. The accents were so many that they weighed a ton, but I liked the chain because it made me feel safe somehow. I grabbed it instinctively and tucked it inside my shirt collar. We exchanged goodbyes with the couple and off we went. We were hiking for over an hour, stopping here and there to take pictures, drink water, or give the dogs a treat. Nothing weird until then, and we were almost at the mountain. We could faintly hear the waterfall. The next part of the way was rougher though. We had to climb down this cliff, literally a cliff. We didn't bring any gear, so we had to be extra careful with the dogs, but they did it rather quickly and with no hassle. While I was heading down though, my ex was waiting for me at the base of the cliff with his dog. Mine had turned back. She always does this when she's hiking with me. Mine had turned back to come down again with me, but stopped at the top and stared at the woods before the cliff. She stared and then started growling. This is weird. My dog is by far the sweetest dog ever. She never growls. But this time, she seemed fierce. She kept growling more and more while I called for her. Mina, come here. She then looked at me again, almost halfway down the cliff and then back at the woods, and then back at me again, and started heading down. She would stop every now and then and stare back at the woods, but eventually got down with me and we kept walking. The mountains have created a natural junction, with water falling from the very top to a clear pond at the bottom. The water was freezing cold and the noise was pretty intense. The dogs were beyond themselves. They started running, jumping, chasing each other, barking and swimming. We took off our clothes and jumped in as well. It was delightful. The cold water against the hot weather felt like heaven, and we were high by then, so the sensations were very strong. We kept playing in the water for a while. Then we got out and sat on the rocks to smoke some more. After a while, we heard the dogs barking, but not playfully like before. They were barking loud and menacingly. We looked at them. They were both at the very edge of the pond, staring at the woods on the top of the mountain and barking. The fur on their backs was raised. They looked creepy. I called for Mina again. My boyfriend did the same with Rebecca, but neither of them flinched. Their paws were firm on the ground, grasping at it. Their barks were so loud that it was becoming unbearable. I got up and walked over there and grabbed Femina by her torso, just kind of giving her a hug and pulling her towards me. She kind of snapped out of it and started licking at me furiously. I kept asking, "What's wrong, girl? What's wrong?" And she just whimpered, licked me, and then started going back and forth from the edge of the pond to where I was kneeling. She whimpered really loud, like crying. I was getting scared. I said to my ex, "Screw this, I'm out of here. She's acting really weird." Rebecca, his dog, always barked at everything, so he wasn't concerned at all. He agreed though, and we started packing. Then I heard something, a whistle. It was definitely a human whistle. It sounded like a little melody. First a long one, and then two short ones. I stopped dead on my track and tried to hear it again, over the barking of the waterfall, but I couldn't hear it anymore. I thought to myself, weirdest bird ever, and put my backpack on. We started heading back to the cliff again, and the dogs were getting worse. It was almost impossible to hear anything besides them barking and growling, and Femina whimpering by my side. I started climbing first, and my ex was behind me, and the dogs made it to the top in no time, and started barking again and growling at the woods. I kept telling Femina to shut it, but she wouldn't. And then I finally made it to the top. One side had a huge drop of over 50 to 80 feet, and on the other side, there was the woods. Tall pine trees and wild bushes everywhere made them look dense and deep. I urged my boyfriend to hurry because the dogs were unbearable, and then I heard it, branches breaking. The dogs got even more aggressive. They started running towards the edge of the forest, back and forth to where I was. I just stood there, staring as well. More branches. Now they were getting louder. I knew someone was there, getting closer with each step. I kept trying to see past the tree line, but only saw green and brown and darkness. But then a figure started emerging from it. First I thought it was just another couple, or maybe just a hiker like us. But this figure was moving weird, a little bit too heavy to be a hiker, and slowly, and had no backpack, but the hands were holding something in front of him. It was a shotgun. What is this? I freaked out. The dog started barking louder, and Rebecca almost jumped the guy when he came out of the woods. He was stocky, wearing a black jacket, shotgun, pointing straight at me. I yelled at Rebecca, "Rebecca, stop it! Come here!" And she actually did. Weird, because she never listens. He then said, "Tell your boyfriend to come up." And I just took a couple of steps back. I was almost on the edge of the cliff and stared down. My boyfriend was almost there, and he had heard the voice of the man. He hurried up and climbed to where I was. I was standing there, petrified, not able to talk, just looking at the dark circle of the shotgun barrel. Then I caught a glance of something shiny, something metal looking. He had a machete hanging from his belt loop. Just like that, a huge machete with rusty edges. I was beside myself, but I managed to grab my boyfriend's hand as he stood up on the top of the cliff and stared at the man. My ex was nothing less than scary. He was easily 6'8" and weighed over 200 pounds. I don't know how much because we use a metric system in Colombia, but he was for all intents and purposes a big muscular guy. His green eyes glared as he stared at the man, and then he said, "Take what you want and leave us." The noise the dogs were making was extreme. The guy looked at me and pointed the gun as he said,
"Grab those dogs and shut them up, or I'll shoot them both right here."
I called them softly and grabbed Femina by the collar. She stared, licking me and whimpering, scared and not understanding what was going on. Rebecca was a little rascal, so I kind of crawled on the ground and grabbed her by the back of the leg. She then turned around and I grabbed her collar. I held them both close to me while I petted them, whispering, "Shh, it's okay, girl, it's okay," over and over. I was in tears by then, but my ex stood his ground and just kept glaring. I saw his fists and he had them tightly closed as if he was going to punch the guy. He then said to my ex, "Don't try anything stupid, pretty boy." And they started getting closer. I actually thought of jumping off of the cliff, but then what? Even if I made it alive, they could easily shoot me from a distance in the canyon underneath. We were trapped. He then said, "Give me the bags," to which we replied by taking them off and sliding them on the ground closer to them. And then he said, "Stand up," looking at me and pointing the gun. I could now see his face. He had sunspots all over and really bad acne. His eyes were dark and small, like a bird's eyes. His hair was greasy and covered with a dirty black beanie. A big round nose completed the look and gave him an almost comical appearance. But there was nothing comical about that shotgun. I stood up, holding the collars of the dogs tight together, and then he said, Not bad at all." He then turned to look at a guy with a revolver and said, "Bring me that gold chain." I kind of gasped when he said that, and the other guy started walking towards me. The dog started pulling the leashes. He stopped and looked at them, and then at the other guy and said, "I don't like these fuckers. Let's just get rid of them." I was full on crying by then and pleaded for them not to shoot the dogs. I took the leashes with one hand and with the other yanked the chain off of my neck and then turned and gave it to my ex. He grabbed it and stared at me. He knew how much it meant to me and my family, but it was either that or our lives. So he turned and walked towards the guy. He grabbed it quickly and went back to his position. The other guy then stared at us. then back at the guys on his side and asked them,
Have you ever had your way with a little spoiled girl?
and they all laughed. I felt like throwing up. My ex looked even more angry now. He then said, "We don't have anything else. Please, let us go." Then the guy quieted down and stared back.
You do have something else. I'm deciding whether or not to let you walk out of here with it.
And then he gave me a perverted look that made my skin crawl. My ex then said, "Sure, you can have your way with her," in such a calm way that I thought he was giving me away, but then added, "After you fucking cowards fight me one by one and beat me until I'm dead, because that's the only way." They all laughed at this, loud chuckles, and then he said,
Nah, not worth it. I could just shoot you and be done with it.
and then he pointed the gun at him. I was in shock. I couldn't believe that this is how our lives were going to end. Massacred over a stupid gold chain. 1,000 thoughts were going through my head. I was shivering when I heard this really faint whistle. It was really far away. Same frequency as theirs, but it was definitely far away. At least 3 miles away. It was faint, but I heard it. They did too. The guy with the shotgun stopped laughing and stood still as he was trying to listen better this way. And then the whistle was there again, but this time the first whistle was way longer. And the 3 of them started walking backwards, almost retracing their steps back to the woods. And then the guy said,
You two fuckers are in luck.
and turned around and disappeared as fast as they had shown up. My ex and I exchanged looks of astonishment and then bolted out of there, running through the woods like maniacs. The dogs were rattled up and they almost jumped and ran all the way down to the main road. We didn't stop, we didn't talk, we didn't even look back. We just ran and jumped and stumbled until we were in the first climb again. Only then did we look back. I thought I saw something behind the tree line, but I brushed it off as I jumped down and called out to Femina. We then started walking home at a slower pace this time, not excited anymore, thinking how we would enter the flat without any keys. They were in my backpack. I touched my neck. The yanking of the chain left a little red mark. After all, it was solid gold.